we are part of a larger group called Always, and I'm just going to go to the next slide here because Always is an acronym that stands for Alliance for Literary Writers, Authors, and Yabbering Scribes. Um, Obviously, we don't repeat that every time we meet with people, but it's a writers group for people that have already published work. And we get together periodically to critique each other, to help each other with things like marketing, and to offer our services to the general public, like we're doing right now. The whole purpose of this particular book, Journeys, and this is a picture when we launched it. As a matter of fact, when we launched it, it was the #1 bestseller that day on Amazon. So we're very proud of that. That's not all of us, but that's a good scattering of our group. The whole purpose of this particular book was to help other wannabe authors. Maybe they got stuck, needed some help to finish their manuscript, or more likely, the publishing industry is a very difficult one to maneuver through. There's the traditional publishers where you have to have an agent and it takes a very long time. And unless your name is Stephen King or David Baldacci, it's a difficult situation to try and get an agent and a traditional publisher to publish your book, especially if you're brand new. But there are other avenues, and many people are choosing independent, meaning they're publishing it through ADP portion of Amazon or through other independent publishers. And I'll be happy to answer questions upon that when we get there. Um, just so you know who I am, mention my name is Howard Gershkowitz. I live in Chandler, Arizona. Moved here from New York many years ago. I spent most of my career as a financial advisor. In fact, I'm still doing that 42 years later. Um, but like many people, I've always wanted to be an author, be able to write, to be able to share my thoughts and ideas, and maybe make an impact on the world. So in 19, let's see, no, 19, what am I talking about? About 2005, I decided, you know what? If ever I'm going to be an author, I had better get my act together and start working. So I started taking classes. I went to some local colleges to take workshops and so forth. And fortunately, in 2017, my first novel came out called The Operator, um, followed by Not on My Watch in 2021. Recently published a special delivery, and I have a fourth book, The Painting, which I hope to have out and published by the end of this year. Um, and so I went through that process, as did everybody else in this Journeys to Authorship. And so the genesis of the book was we said, you know what, people need to hear these stories as an inspiration and to show, hey, anybody I can get their book written and published. We represent, with the 14 of us, there's probably 12 different genres, and there's certainly 14 different stories, 14 different avenues that we each took from being indie authors to traditionally published authors. There's fantasy, there's historical fiction. Mine is purely fiction, although many of my stories are based on real life situations. And so we have put together this presentation. We like to do it live when we can. We take it to libraries and businesses and book clubs and so forth to share our stories and hopefully answer questions and give people some ideas about where do we go from here? How do we get a publisher if we want to do that? How do we publish it independently if we want to do it on our own? All of those types of questions are available to you. Um, so I'm not going to go through a whole logistics of the book itself. We actually self-published it ourselves because our fearless leader, Ann Vidian, who is an editor and book shepherd, um, she actually did all the work. We owe her a great debt of gratitude for doing that. Um, uh, I think, first of all, let me just take a look here and see if there are any questions. I see one up here. Okay. I don't see any questions yet, so I'm just going to keep on talking. Please feel free to use the question and answer or the chat box if you want me to address anything. Um, my own journey for writing, when I finally decided to do so, was to, as I said, go to some classes at the local community college level. Also, we're fortunate that right down the street from us is ASU. So they have a writing center there for people like myself who don't want to matriculate and get an MFA. So I went there to start learning once again things like plot and character and character development and so forth. Um, Fortunately, there's an author here, one of my favorite authors by the name of Clive Cussler. If any of you know who he was. Unfortunately, he passed away about 4 years ago, but he lived up in Scottsdale. And one of my workshop professors said, you know what, if you've got a favorite author, why don't you drop him a line, give him a call, a text message, an email, and see if he or she would be willing to help you. Well, I did that. I sent a letter to Mr. Cussler here in town. To my chagrin, that letter got redirected to his agent, who told me that no, you never write directly to the author, you always write to the agent. I didn't know that, so I was concerned that it would never get responded to. Fortunately, he did forward it on to Mr. Cussler, who then responded to me. He sent me a handwritten letter, which surprised me. It included crossouts and misspellings. But it encouraged me to get working. He said that it took him 11 years before he got his book published, his first one. He challenged me to beat that, and I managed to do it in 8 years instead of 11. So, as a celebration, I managed to meet him at the Poison Pen here in Scottsdale, which is a local bookstore where he does most of his signings. And not only did he sign the book, but he took a picture with me. And on the back of all of my books is a picture of that. So the picture on the back of my book is a cropped picture of me with Clive Cussler. I encourage all of you to do the same thing if you have an interest in becoming an author or a writer. Contact people that have done it. Do that in any field, really, and pick their brains. Most people are willing to help you. As I said, that was the whole genesis of Journeys to Authorship, was our desire to help others. Our belief, and this is from Ann Vidian, it takes a community to raise an author. And that's absolutely true. Between editing, revising, critiquing, writing query letters, sending them out, getting responses, and just pursuing it, and just keeping up your motivation because it's a long road. 8, 9, 10 years is a long time. Uh, so it does drain quite a bit. You say, well, am I ever going to be able to do this? But that's something that you can do so long as you persevere. Um, anyway, so I did all that work. I actually wrote the second novel first, not on my watch. I had written that during a course at the local community college, and I thought it was the cat's meow. I wrote it. I started sending it out to agents and publishing houses and saying, boy, I'm ready to collect my $100,000 upfront royalty and become a New York Times bestseller listing. Unfortunately, as happens in this business, the only thing I ever collected were rejection slips. And since nowadays everything is done over the internet, most of those slips were in the form of an email saying thank you, but not for us. I put that aside, and that was very disappointing. However, I was up in a local community in northern Arizona called Prescott, an old hotel up there from 1926. And I had some inspiration to write a time travel novel going back to the 1920s to try and stop the Great Depression. Anyway, I wrote that book, and this time I did it a little bit differently. I went ahead after writing it, and I actually hired an editor. In this case, it was Ann Vidian. That's how I met her. And we worked diligently for probably a year, going back and forth, making the changes, adding things that would help people to keep informed of where in time they were, because I had my main character moving back and forth between the present and the 20s and 30s. Anyway, I started submitting that book, and lo and behold, a publishing company out of Boston by the name of All Things That Matter Press, a small independent publisher, wrote to me and said, "Hey, we read the first 50 pages. We want to see the rest of the book. We're interested in offering you a contract." So you might have heard me scream that day if you were listening, all the way from California, because it was so exciting to actually get an acceptance. I sent him the manuscript. He took a look at it. We again, more editing, more revising, but ultimately in 2017, it got released, and it's still one of my favorite books. Then I said, well, if you like that one, let me take a look at the other book I wrote, Not on My Watch. So I started reading it, and I realized that it really wasn't very good. Even though it was my first attempt, I hadn't had it edited. I really hadn't done a lot of critiquing. I hadn't had any real beta readers take a look at it. And sure enough, that I realized that, hey, you know what? I still had a lot of work to do. So I went back to the drawing board. I started to rewrite it, re-engaged Ann Vidian, my editor, more critiques, more beta readers. And sure enough, after about 9 months of revision, I submitted it to All Things That Matter Press. And he said, "That's terrific. Let's go ahead and publish it." So from that, I learned my lesson. You've got to write and rewrite and edit and rewrite and revise. And then when you're done doing that, you have to make sure that you get a beta reader or two or three, and hopefully they can give you some good advice and tell you, okay, is this good? Do you need to make changes? So ultimately, I did that with special delivery, sent it to him. He has published that one that came out in the fall of this past year. And now I'm encouraged to go ahead and finish my next book called The Painting. So I'm going to stop there for a second, so I don't want to use up every second talking here. Do we have any questions, or what inspires you and keeps you motivated to keep on writing? Excellent question, because it's a lonely task. It's something that you can't necessarily do with other people other than when you do critiquing. But it's something that comes from inside. You just have to sit down each day, and that's my goal. In fact, when I'm done with this presentation, I head out to Starbucks, which is where I do a lot of my writing. I get myself a nice fresh cup of coffee, put my computer out, and I start typing. Sometimes I only get a couple of paragraphs done. Sometimes I can complete an entire chapter. But the idea is, if you find a routine that works for you, whether it's going to a coffee house, you have a den or spare room, or even just a corner of the house, if you can get a consistent time and a consistent every day or every other day or 4 days a week, whatever it is, that becomes a habit. And if you can force yourself to create that habit, that's how you get to persevere. Um, I also get my inspiration, motivation, as I mentioned, from my writing groups. I have several. I have one that's specifically a critique group. I have always, and again, we really do get together to inspire each other, because sometimes you need a pat on the back, and sometimes you need a kick in the you know where, in order to keep on going. So get your inspiration mostly from inside, but make sure that you're networking with other similar-minded people who have the same goals as you have in mind. Okay. Is there anybody else here?
Howard, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What courses can you recommend as a starter in the community college level?
Okay. You may
Or could it be online course?
well, actually, originally I did it in person. I'm more of an in-person type learner than I am online. But most colleges per se, have it both online and in person. So if you're close enough to do an in-person class, I recommend that only because you're going to be in a classroom filled with other like-minded people who are going to be on the same wavelength as you. But online also, you meet a lot of good people who are doing the same thing. Many of these actually have courses that are named How to Write My First Novel, okay? Or how to write a short story, or if you're into poetry, I've taken poetry classes as well. So you just look at the creative writing curriculum, and most community colleges probably have a couple dozen classes depending upon what you're interested in. I took one here locally with a gal who became a good friend and mentor for me. But she actually had a three-class trilogy: how to write the novel, how to critique the novel, and then how to publish the novel. It took 3 full semesters, but I'm very glad that I went through that.
Howard, I received another question directly.
Mhm.
Um, I know that there's a follow-up question, so perhaps we'll do this one first. Does writing uh, keep one away from being sociable to other people that have different interests than they do?
Well, certainly, as I mentioned, writing is a very individual thing. I mean, you can collaborate if you're, and I know people that have collaborated on a book, but normally it's two people, maybe three, especially if it's something to do with historical. But yeah, unfortunately, when you're sitting and writing, whether you sit down for 15 minutes a day or 3 hours a day, obviously you're not being sociable with other people. That's the only way to do it. But that doesn't mean that you've devoted 24/7 to the writing. I mean, that would be kind of megalomaniac, in my opinion. Some people, that's what they want to do, and that's terrific. But you still need to carve out a certain amount of time for yourself. But again, most of us that are doing this also combine our social skills by going to writing groups, by taking these classes. I probably go to 2 or 3 per week, and that helps me to continue to socialize, and it's with people that have the same interests as I. People that have a different interest, they're going to go off on their own way anyway. So let them, and you do what comes natural for you. You said
So,
had another.
Howard, how do you meet these people? Are you like on meetup.com or something for these
Okay.
groups?
All right. There are several different ways of doing it. And you're correct. Meetup.com is one way to do it. A lot of writing groups are on there, critique groups as well as editing groups. Local libraries, almost all of them have writing programs. So I'm involved with the two, Tempe and Chandler, which are fairly close to where I live. I take some classes at one and some at the other. Most bookstores also have writing groups that get together either once a month or once every other week. So any venue where you find books and authors, you probably will find critique groups. Um, Book clubs exist out there as well. Of the book clubs, they get together to read a book and then critique it. And my hope is for everybody that writes a book, your book ends up in a book club somewhere, so you can sell a lot of books. But yeah, libraries, and even the community colleges often will host groups that get together outside of classroom and meet up. Those are all online if you want. That way, you don't have to worry about traveling.
Can you tell us more about the books that you have written and published?
Okay. Well, I mentioned the first one was The Operator. Um, I happen to be a financial advisor by profession. Read that, stockbroker, because it's something I've always been interested in. So the first tip I'll offer here, and I think Anna and Lori said the same thing at the first presentation. If you're going to be an author, write about something you know, something that's of interest to you. So when I was up at the Hacienda Inn up in Prescott, realizing that it predated the Great Depression, that was my thought. Was, well, what if I, as a financial advisor, could go back to 1929 and somehow convince people not to do the things that caused the crash of 29? So that's how that book began. It turned into a time travel novel because um, I made believe like I met somebody in 1929, told them the story of what was going to happen with the crash in October. But woke up back in the present day, and that person, knowing what was coming, invested after the crash and left me $1 billion and said, "Stop the next one." And that's really what the story was about: is what could I do um, to stop the next Great Depression? One of the solutions I had in that book was an infrastructure bill, and interestingly enough, um, President Obama passed one. So it was a very timely book because President of the United States actually did what I suggested in the book. I doubt it was because he read my book, but it was just coincidental. The second book, called Not on My Watch, is actually based on a true story. As a financial advisor, I read a lot of magazines, news articles, the New York Times, and so forth. And I saw a story about Medicare fraud, a hospital in New Jersey that was indicted on like $100 million worth of Medicare fraud. I said, boy, I want to address this, but if I tried to write a nonfiction story about it and I got it wrong, I would probably get sued, and rightfully so. However, I decided, well, I could write a fiction book about it, so I did. I picked a local hospital. I made believe that a local nurse, in conjunction with, surprise, surprise, stockbroker, went after a company that was trying to buy the hospital out and turn it into a Medicare mill. So what's interesting is I had a fellow writer. She was nonfiction. She was an ASU professor of statistics, and she wrote books on crime. She happened to have done research on Medicare fraud, and she shared that research with me. So everything in the book actually is true because it's based on research on what happens in the Medicare industry and how billions and billions of dollars is wasted every year by fraudulent claims and so forth. So, but I put it against a very interesting background of intrigue, where the nurse and her stockbroker boyfriend attempt to stop the takeover, and they are successful, by the way. So it's a good book to read. This most recent one, called um, Special Delivery, was actually based on a short story I wrote. I wrote a series of short stories called The Post Office Box Mysteries, in which the two postal clerks introduced and talked about stories about the people that came and went to the post office. In this particular case, it was a young woman who was a customer. She was a snowbird, meaning that she splits her time between North Dakota and Arizona. But she was depressed. She ordered a suicide device from Oregon, where it's legal to do yourself in. But it gets delivered to her address in Arizona, and our young clerk, Stanley, takes it upon himself, not knowing what's in the box, to hand drive it all the way up to Fargo to deliver it to her in the hopes that she will appreciate it and fall in love with him, not knowing that he was delivering the means by which she wanted to do herself in. So that came from a short story, actually, and it's based upon a true story of a young woman who actually moved to Oregon, specifically because she had a life-threatening disease and she didn't want to go through or put her family through uh, uh, what was going to happen.
Oh, thank you so much, Howard. So regarding the second book, regarding the Medicare fraud,
Mhm.
hospital fraud, so basically you used facts but presented it as a fiction. Is that how
Correct.
it came
Mhm.
about? Okay,
Yeah, it
thank
was
you.
it was an interesting endeavor because, again, I wanted to use real facts, and I did. But I want to do it in a fictional setting. But um, yeah, everything I talked about in terms of how the fraud was perpetrated was true.
Thank you. That's a very